night sky over Gaza was unusually silent before the storm. Beneath that silence, tension rippled through the region like an electric current. At precisely 2:17 a.m., a coordinated strike shattered the calm, targeting Israel's most elite naval unit, Shayetet 13. Known for their stealth, precision, and lethal efficiency, these commandos were considered untouchable. But overnight, that myth collapsed. Intelligence reports confirmed that over 7,000 operatives were neutralized in a single, sweeping counteroffensive. The implications were immediate and seismic. For years, Shayetet 13 had operated as the invisible hand of Israeli power projection, executing covert missions across borders, often without acknowledgement. Their fall wasn't just a tactical loss. It was symbolic. It pierced the illusion of invincibility that Tel Aviv had carefully cultivated. Inside the Israeli command center, chaos erupted. Screens flickered with red alerts, encrypted channels buzzed with fragmented orders, and the Prime Minister, once confident in his military supremacy, was forced into silence. His face, usually stern and composed, betrayed disbelief. The blow wasn't just military, it was political. The opposition seized the moment, calling for accountability, demanding answers. How could such a well-guarded unit be compromised so thoroughly? The answer lay in a shift that had been brewing for months. A growing resistance, smarter, more unified, and no longer afraid. On the streets of Ramallah and Khan Yunis, people didn't sleep. They watched, waited, and whispered. The news spread like wildfire. For the first time in years, hope didn't feel like a distant dream. It felt tangible. The fall of Shayetet 13 wasn't just a headline. It was a turning point, and for the Palestinian people, it was a reminder that even the mightiest can fall. The aftermath was impossible to ignore. International media scrambled to verify the numbers, but the silence from Israeli officials spoke louder than any press release. In Tel Aviv, the usual hum of confidence was replaced by unease. Military analysts, once proud of Shayetet 13's reputation, now questioned the strategic missteps that led to such a catastrophic failure. Was it arrogance, over-reliance on technology, or had the resistance simply evolved beyond expectations? Whatever the reason, the loss was undeniable, and for the Palestinian people, it marked a rare moment of vindication. In refugee camps across Lebanon and Jordan, families gathered around radios and phones, listening to every update. Children who had grown up hearing only stories of occupation and loss now saw a flicker of something different: resilience. The fall of Shayetet 13 wasn't just a military statistic. It was a crack in the wall of oppression. It was proof that the struggle wasn't futile, that resistance, when rooted in unity and strategy, could shift the balance. Meanwhile, the Israeli Prime Minister faced mounting pressure. His allies distanced themselves. His critics grew louder. The Knesset buzzed with speculation about leadership changes. And in the streets, protests erupted, not just from Palestinians, but from Israelis disillusioned by years of conflict with no resolution. The myth of military supremacy had been shattered, and with it, the illusion that peace could be delayed indefinitely. For Palestinians, this moment wasn't about revenge. It was about recognition, about being seen not as victims, but as people capable of defending their dignity. The fall of Shayetet 13 was a message. The tide can turn, and when it does, history remembers not just the victors, but the voices that refused to be silenced. The global response was swift and divided. Western media outlets hesitated, their headlines vague, their language cautious. But in the global south, especially across the Arab world, the story was front-page news. Analysts in Doha, Istanbul, and Kuala Lumpur dissected the operation with precision, praising the strategic brilliance behind it. Social media erupted. Hashtags supporting Palestine trended worldwide. Videos of celebrations in Gaza, prayers in Al-Aqsa, and solidarity marches in London and Jakarta flooded timelines. The narrative was shifting. For decades, Palestinians had been portrayed through a lens of victimhood. Now, they were being seen as tacticians, as people who could challenge a military giant and win. Inside Gaza, the mood was electric, not with arrogance, but with quiet pride. Medical workers, teachers, and shopkeepers spoke of the night's events with reverence. It wasn't just about defeating a military unit, it was about reclaiming dignity. For years, the people had endured blockades, bombings, and silence from the world. But now their voices were echoing. The fall of Shayetet 13 was a rupture in the narrative. It forced the world to look again, to question assumptions, to ask why such a powerful force could be undone by a people long denied basic rights. In Israel, the prime minister's silence grew heavier. Rumors swirled about emergency meetings, foreign pressure, and internal dissent. The military's credibility was under siege. And in that vacuum, voices calling for justice grew louder. Not just from Palestinians, but from Jews, Christians, and Muslims around the world who saw the moment for what it was, a reckoning. The fall of Shayetet 13 wasn't the end. It was a beginning, a signal that the old order was cracking, and that a new chapter, written by those who had long been silenced, was finally being opened. The psychological impact of the operation rippled far beyond the battlefield. For Palestinians, it was a rare moment of psychological liberation. Generations raised under occupation had internalized a sense of helplessness, conditioned to believe that resistance was symbolic at best. But this night rewrote that belief, proved that strategy, unity, and resolve could yield real results. In homes across Gaza, fathers spoke to sons not of despair, but of possibility. Mothers, who had buried children in past conflicts, allowed themselves a moment of pride, not in violence, but in the assertion of dignity. The fall of Shayetet 13 was not celebrated with vengeance. It was mourned as a necessary reckoning. In contrast, Israeli society faced a reckoning of its own. The myth of invincibility had been shattered. Military pundits scrambled to explain the breach. Some blamed intelligence failures, others pointed to overconfidence. But beneath the surface, a deeper truth emerged. The occupation had bred resistance, and that resistance had matured. It was no longer reactive, it was proactive, calculated, and deeply rooted in the will to survive. The Prime Minister, once hailed as a master strategist, now stood exposed. His silence was interpreted not as restraint, but as defeat. Across the world, the conversation shifted. No longer was Palestine just a humanitarian issue, it was a geopolitical reality. The fall of Shayetet 13 forced governments to reconsider their alliances, their narratives, their complicity. And in that shift, the Palestinian voice grew louder. Not just in protests, but in policy rooms, in media studios, in diplomatic corridors. The operation had done more than dismantle a military unit. It had redefined the stakes. It had reminded the world that justice delayed is not justice denied, and that even in the darkest night, resistance can spark a dawn. In the days that followed, the silence from the Israeli leadership became deafening. No official statement, no press conference, no acknowledgement of the scale of the loss. But silence, too, speaks volumes. It signaled a fracture in the narrative, a moment when control slipped and truth began to surface. The fall of Shayetet 13 was no longer just a military event. It had become a symbol of resistance, of resilience, of the power of a people long denied their voice. And in that symbol, Palestinians found something deeper than victory. They found validation. From the olive groves of Nablus to the alleys of Hebron, stories emerged. Not of vengeance, but of perseverance. Elders recalled past uprisings, past betrayals, past hopes. And now they saw a new generation rising, not with stones alone, but with strategy, with unity, with purpose. The fall of Shayetet 13 was a rupture in the status quo. It forced the world to confront uncomfortable truths, that occupation breeds resistance, that silence enables injustice, and that dignity, once awakened, cannot be suppressed. In the corridors of power, from Washington to Brussels, policymakers reevaluated their stance. The usual talking points no longer sufficed. The Palestinian struggle was no longer a footnote, it was the headline. And in that shift, the people of Palestine stood taller. Not because they sought war, but because they demanded peace with justice. The defeat of Israel's elite forces was not an end. It was a beginning of a narrative where Palestinians are not just survivors, but shapers of their destiny. And as the dust settled, one truth remained. When dignity is defended, even the most powerful must reckon with the strength of the human spirit.